there. So Mark is going to talk today about a website, how to write a good website specification document. So let's hear him. Thank you very much.
Cool. Yep, so I'm going to talk to you about how to write, I hope, how to write a website specification. We'll have a quick look at what they are and things like that. So my name's Mark, if you've not met me before. I've been using WordPress for a long, long time. And as Carmen said, I run a small agency, High Rise Digital, where we build WordPress websites for various different clients. But you don't want to hear about that, you want to hear about the actual talk instead, which is what we'll get to. So, to start the talk, we're going to use a bit of an analogy, so bear with me here. So, when you're writing a website specification, it's all about obviously getting down the details of what you're going to build, who you're going to build it for, how's it going to work, etc. So that both parties, both you, the person or people that are building the website, and the person you're building it for knows exactly what is going to be built. When both parties are on different pages of the book, that's when it becomes a problem and people get disappointed because one side thinks they're going to get X and the other side thinks they're going to deliver Y. So that's what writing a web specification is kind of about. So here's the analogy then. So let's imagine that you're a builder and you build houses and someone comes to you and says, and you've probably all had this in your inbox if you build websites for people, give me a rough price to build a new house. Go on, what does it cost me? And what's your response going to be to that? It's going to be, well, I don't know, it could be anything. It could be like 100,000, it could be 5 million. It depends what you want, don't you? So you're going to go back to them, you're going to go, I need some more information. I need to know what this house is going to include, I need to know how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, I need to know whether it's got a garage, is it 2 stories, is it detached, is it, etc., etc. So you're going to go back and ask them some more detail. So they're going to come back to you with some more detail. They want a detached house with 4 bedrooms, an ensuite bathroom and a garage. And let's imagine at this point, you don't have a clear specification. You go, yeah, I'll build that for you, that's fine. So you quote, you build a house, blah, 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 and then the client, comes along and says, click. But there's only one en suite. I wanted one in every bedroom. And then you're like, well, I didn't know that, did I? Because there was no specification. There was no written down, both parties didn't know what they were actually getting. Everyone made some assumptions that weren't actually true. So you thought you'd built this wonderful house, this wonderful product, but the client wasn't happy because it wasn't to what they thought it was going to be. So that's why we need a specification. So what actually is a specification? So here's our definition of it. I'm sure others have their own definitions, but this is what we think it is. So it is a document. It is a written document, and yes, they do take some time to write, unfortunately, but the benefits of doing so far outweighs the time that you spend doing it, basically. So it's a document that articulates the project's goals, objectives, and tactics. What we're trying to achieve, what are the objectives of the project, and how we're going to get there. It should outline the constraints. So what aren't we doing? What's holding? What's the boundaries of what we're trying to achieve? The deadlines or the technical restraints. So if it's something, and it depends what the project is as to what those technical restraints might be, for example. But that's what it should look at. And it can also include project details such as the team involved, the stakeholders, and the points of contact. Now, I think that last point is actually very, very important. Who is responsible for doing each part of this project? If you don't know that at the start, then again, that's where both parties aren't clear. So for example, and this is a classic one that always comes up, who is writing or adding the content of your website? You build this wonderful thing out, and we've had this in the past, and you show it to the client, and they're like, that's great, but like, what's all this text in it, lorem ipsum, something or other? It just like, well, where's that come from? It's like, well, you're supposed to put the content in, and and everyone's got to be aware of that at the start. So we need to define the roles of who's doing what, and so on. So why we want a specification? Well, I already kind of mentioned that with the first analogy. Let's look at a more web analogy though. Let's imagine that you want a contact form on your website. So, brightness is a bit bright there, you can't really see the fields, but this is a classic contact form. Name, email, company, how can we help you? You fill in your information and you press submit. So if you, in your specification or in your communication with the clients, have said, yeah, we'll give you a contact form, and this is what you imagine a contact form looks like. It is, it's a contact form. What's wrong with it? It's perfectly fine. It will work, it will give them the information itself. But what they were looking for was something more like that. It's a little difficult to see. It's basically got some categories. Which department do you want to contact? What is the urgency of the contact? What's the subject? And then we've got like a WYSIWYG sort of box where they can put links in and things, and then we can press submit. So if you built them the first one and they were expecting the second one, someone's going to be disappointed. So what the specification tries to do is remove that uncertainty about what you're building and try to give some clarity about what you're building and what the project should be. Okay, so for me, that's what the specification is trying to do all the time. It's trying to give some clarity to everyone involved, you, the client, anyone that works for you that might be helping you build it, any external contractors you need to bring in that are going to do a bit of the job for you. So if you're someone who doesn't do any design, for example, and you need to get a designer to come into the project, do they know, what the design constraints are, what the specification is, and how that design is supposed to work? And giving clarity to everybody on the team is really important. So that's what I think a web specification kind of is and should be trying to achieve. You might have to bear with me because I've got a bit of a cold. So let's move on and have a look at the actual document itself and what to put in it. Now, I'm not saying this is like absolutely correct. This is what we have used, and this is what we have refined and continue to refine every time we write one. So in 12 months' time, I'm absolutely positive that this will look slightly different, because every time we write one, we try and improve it, basically. We think about what happened in the last project. At the end of every project, we have a little project retrospective that goes through what went well, what didn't go well, how can we improve it. And part of that is to make sure that the document we give to the client and that everyone's working off is the best document we can. And if something comes up that says, this was wrong, the client wasn't aware of X or Y, then we're going to change it. So it is a working sort of template that we use, but this is its current format and the sorts of things that we include. So I think the more detail you put in this document, the better your project will go. Now, granted, how long can you spend on this document? That's a decision that you need to make. Based on the fact of, you're going to win the work, is a client paying for this document, etc. But what is clear is that the more detail it has and the more information it has in it, usually the project goes smoother because everyone knows what they're doing. So here's what we put into our document. These are sort of the headings that we've got in our specification. Now, this talk's going to be about 20-30 minutes, so I'm not going to go through each one of these because some of them are more obvious than others, and obviously I just don't have time. So I'm going to cover some specific sections. So we've got overview, what's the overview of the project, a general paragraph about what we're doing, who the team is, I mentioned that, who is actually on board on this project. You might not at this stage need to name names because you might not know who the designer is going to be or who the developer is going to be, but you need to name them as a person that is going to will have a name if you get the job, if that makes sense. And then you can decide, the developer is going to do this at this time for this person, etc. What are the goals? Very important. What's the point of this build? What we're trying to achieve? Are there any phases in it? Is it going to be a staged approach? Is it going to be like develop, design, deliver, that's it? Or is it going to be, we're going to build this bit first, which I would recommend, by the way, and then we're going to deliver that to the client, and then we're going to build this bit, and then we're going to deliver that, and then we're going to build this bit, which is a good method of doing it. The content. So what is the content of the website? You'd be surprised about how many clients don't really know what the content's going to be, even though they want a website. So really think about drilling down to them and asking them questions about what their content is and why do they want that content. What's the purpose of that page going to be, etc. What the design is there any brand guidelines, colours and things like that? Functionality, this is a huge one, absolutely huge topic, functionality, and it depends what you're building. If it's a brochure site for a small company that might have 6 or 7 pages in a contact form, that section is going to be pretty straightforward. If it's an e-commerce site, then God help you, it's going to be huge, but you get the idea. Accessibility. Every website should be accessible to everybody. So are there any specific needs that you need in your website for the audience that you have? What browser support are you going to have? Who's going to host the site and how's that going to work? What about ongoing maintenance? Is the client aware that it's needed? Do they know it's needed? Who's going to deliver it? Are they going to look after it? Are they expecting you to look after it? And then assumptions. Every time we do something like this, we make assumptions. We have assumptions that we think we know and we think the client will know. The client has assumptions that they think we'll already know, but we might not. So we need to write down what we're assuming is going to happen. What are the milestones for delivery, are the deadlines, and finally, if you get that far, what is the budget? You know, how much is it going to cost? And obviously, is that going to be okay with your client? So as I said, I'm not going to cover each one of these, but the premise of this talk was one of our most popular blog posts, which we wrote, which was called How to Write a Website Specification. And strangely enough, it does pretty well in Google. So if you do want to follow along on this, if you just Google website specification, I've got a blog post which kind of outlines most of this content. Obviously, I'm going to try and give it some more context in this talk, but you can see some of the bits that I perhaps just skip over a little bit. You might want to read them on there for a bit more information and a bit more insight. So let's start from the top, and we'll look at the overview section. So this just sets the scene about the project. What is the overall sort of aim? It might be as simple as a simple sentence saying, you know, we're building a website for company X to showcase their products and services, something like that. It might be even, you know, more detailed than that. It might be that they've got a shop and they need to sell products and they need to do this, but you're just trying to set the picture about what you're trying to achieve. You know, if you were to, someone to stop you and say, what you're building, what's that quick sentence, that quick paragraph that just says, this is what we're doing. Yeah, this is what we're trying to do. So if you pick the document up, you can instantly see that that's what we're trying to achieve. A high-level project scope, and maybe mention who is the target market. And again, this is something that a lot of clients aren't clear on. So if they can't tell you who the target market is, it's really difficult to build a good product for them. So again, that's something you can ask them and drill down and try and really get to the bottom of. Who is the target market? Who's going to be viewing this website? Who's going to be using it, and see if you can get some information from them. Because the more you know, the better your spec's going to be, the better your product's going to be. So the team is the next bit. So depending on the project, we often get builds where we get a design delivered to us. So we don't do a massive amount of design. We do some, but we don't do an awful lot. So it's more, here's the design, go and build this product for us. So in this instance, with the team, we don't need a designer because the design's done essentially. However, having said that, you still need contact with the designer because as a developer, I need to ask questions about that design. So you've drawn this, great. What does it do? You know, how does that move over there when I click it? What does that do? And I need to be able to ask the designer those questions. So you need the designer to be part of the team because I need to contact them. I need to ask questions to them. And a lot of people don't get that. You know, here's the design, they've delivered it to you. That's their job done and gone. And that's fine, but then I've got to make assumptions about that design. And my assumptions might not be how the designer saw them or how the client thinks they're going to work. So having the designer as a named part of the team is always a good thing, even if the design is finished, if you like. If it's not finished, then they need to be on there anyway because they're going to be doing the job. So make it clear who is responsible for the different parts of the process. Even to this document, who's responsible for this document? So if this project specification changes, which it will, by the way, I have not yet worked on a website project where the spec doesn't change. So when the client says to you, oh, we don't need that little bit of contingency on there, you do, because it's going to change. It always does, okay? So who's responsible for this document? Who's going to update it with the new information? You need to have that person named on there so that it's clear. Is it going to be the client? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be whoever it's going to be? And then include their roles, so designers, developers, project managers, content creators, editors, who's responsible for each part. So that when we finish the project, you know, we can make sure that everyone's done their job basically and that everyone's clear. So that's part of the team. Again, it doesn't need to be a long section, but it is important to know who is doing what. So the next bit is the goals, and these are really important. this is why we're building this website. If there must be a reason for it, we don't just say we want a website and we're going to spend thousands of pounds on something that we don't know why we're building it. And if I don't know why you want it, I'm not going to build it right, because I'm not going to focus on those things that you want as your goals. So you need to have some goals in there. So set 2 or 3 SMART goals. So measurable, achievable, so on. You've heard SMART anyway. But make sure that there's something that you can measure at the end. And is there something that you can measure now, at the start of the project, that you can then refer to back at the end, or in a few months when the website's been launched, that you can say, well, yeah, we did achieve that, or we didn't achieve that. And if you didn't, then what can you do again to try and make that better? So taking some data at the start is good. And things like Google Analytics, talk about that a bit, but that's good for that, isn't it? Like, what were the visitors now? What do they do on the website? And are they going to, has that changed at the end of it? And you can focus on the goals as the project delivers. So if you're having a discussion with your team or the client about, we want to do this and we want to do this, hang on a minute, our goals were to do these things. So is that helping our goal? Or have our goals changed? If they haven't changed, then why are we doing it if it's not going to help the goals? And it's going to make them worse. So knowing exactly why people are trying to build this project is important. And everyone should be clear on what they are. So things you could have, for example, increase in newsletter sign-ups by 10% over the next 6 months, something like that. And that's a clear goal that you could test and you could measure. So you could say, how many have we got when we started? Do we have this many more when we finished? And when you're designing the website and when you're building the website, when you're thinking about those interactions with how people sign up, you need to be thinking about that goal. Is it going to help people click this button, sign up? Is it going to encourage them to do so? How can we make them achieve that goal? When you get the designs, you can see, hang on a minute, this newsletter sign-up button's just hidden right in the bottom corner. No one's going to see that. We're never going to meet this goal. And think about that. Or something like monthly sales might want to inquiries increase by 10% in the next 3 months, something like that. And you could measure that, couldn't you, quite easily, assuming you've got the data for now, of course. So, if it's a big project, then it might span over more than one phase. And I would really recommend, if it is a big project and at the moment you're delivering the whole thing, try and phase the thing into pieces rather than trying to deliver something all at once. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that it allows you to test the water with the client, and it allows the client to test the water with you without committing to very much. So, for example, if you were doing a design project for the website, you might say, well, actually, we'll just design the homepage for you for a start, and then we'll maybe build that homepage for you. And that's it, we'll just focus on that. They can be involved in that, you can deliver that to them, you can see how the relationship with the client goes, and then hopefully that'll be brilliant, and then they'll love you, and then you'll be able to get on to the rest of it. Or there might be some natural phases, design, development, content, etc., and then you can add those in. But certainly splitting things up into smaller pieces makes more sense for larger projects. And then who's going to deliver those different phases? Who's going to be responsible for making sure that everything's ready for those phases to go live? You need to have that in there, and that might link back to obviously the team members at the start as well. So yeah, definitely splitting it into phases for larger projects is always a good thing. And putting when they're going to deliver by. Just needs 2 clicks like that. So, this is sometimes really small, sometimes really simple, and sometimes really complicated. And it depends again what the site is itself. So what is the content going to be on the site? And this usually goes as basic as, what pages do you want on your website, basically? What's going to go on the home page? What you have an about page? Why are we having an about page? What's going to go on the about page? What's the point of having this? What's it trying to achieve, etc. And how is that structured? So, is it I land on the home page and there's no navigation, and then I click on buttons on the home page, everything comes off that? Is it that I get snippets of things coming into the home page? There's so many different ways of structuring content, and again, that links back to the goals of the project. How you're going to navigate the site, etc. What is the information that's important to get across to visitors? Now, if you're rebuilding a site, then you probably have a starting point because you've got the existing site to start with. So often the client will want to take content across from that. But I would encourage you to ask questions of the client and try and, change that structure away, because they want a new website. So why do they want one with the same structure as the other one, in a way? It might be that that's not the point of this website. It needs a new design, it's dated, and therefore the structure is fine. But it's certainly worth taking the opportunity to see whether it's working the best as it can do. And the clients will often have a big influence on this because it's their content that they're trying to portray across to their users or to their visitors. But yeah, drill down, ask them questions. What we like to do, and this is very popular, is to do sort of a site map type of thing. This is quite a basic one again. It's actually got colours on it, but you can't see them. Well, say colours, grey colours basically, different shades. And it just gives you the content hierarchy. So we start off at the top with the home page. Underneath that, we might come off and have the about and services, and then underneath that, we have the different services, etc. So it's not rocket science, but you can see that that's how the content is structured. So as a developer, you're thinking immediately, you sat there thinking, right, well, I need post types for this, and I'm going to need taxonomies to group these together, etc. And the news is going to be the blog posts, etc., and things like that. So a really good resource for creating these is called Glue Maps. It's gluemaps.com. It's in the corner. Well, it's just cut off, but it's in the corner. I think it's free. I don't remember paying for it, so I think it's free. And it's a nice, easy way of creating these little diagrams. And again, you could even give that to your client and say, go and have a play with that and see if you can do your content structure. Then have a chat about it and see if you can improve it. So the content structure is where you, in terms of a WordPress sense, so what content types are we going to need? So in WordPress they're called post types. Do we need a new content type for services? Do we need a products type? Do we need a people post type? How are we going to group those together? Do we need taxonomies to make so people can be in a different department and we can group those together and show all the people from a department, etc. That's where you can have all those conversations about how that content is structured and then the sorts of content types we need to build to make it easy for the client to obviously create that content and edit that content and make it obvious. So outline those details here. Also think about page layouts. Most pages don't look the same on a website. So are you going to have predefined layouts? So you say, I want to create a new page and I want it to be layout A. Or are you going to say, every page is just like a page and then I've got all these dynamic pieces of blocks, dare I say, that I'm going to be able to put on them. So, and again, it's important to understand, does the client understand what they're getting? So if they're getting something like a page builder, that's fine. Do they understand that? If they're not getting a page builder and they're getting something that's a bit more structured, so you can't just stick in a slider here and this here, do they understand that? What we found is a lot of clients come and their experience of WordPress is very, very different. All they've ever seen with WordPress is a Divi theme, which just allows them to create all these different modules. That's not really WordPress to us because we don't use that, but that's what they think WordPress is. So again, back to those assumptions, they think that's WordPress, and when we deliver something that doesn't have all those options in, they're like, well, hang on a minute, what's going on here? I should have had all these options to be able to do all these fancy different modules. And we've kind of kept it simple and done it the other way. So that's why it's important to think about how that's going to be edited as well as what sort of content you need. And then there's design. So simple things. How are the designs going to be provided to the developer? Every developer probably wants them differently. Front-end developers I'm talking about, are they going to be layered PNGs? Are they going to be online and like an online, what's it called, like InVision or Adobe XD, is it called? Something like that, all these different things you have these days. Is it just going to be a sketch file? Is it going to be a Photoshop file? Is it going to be an Illustrator file? If it's going to be a Photoshop and Illustrator file, does the developer have Photoshop and Illustrator? Because if they don't, you get to a stop, don't you then? And they have this conflict about, well, I don't have this program and I can't do this. And so if you have all this laid out to start with, it's quite clear. The designer knows they've got to deliver them in this format, this time to this person. Think about that. If the project includes design, as in the design isn't done and it's part of the project, then the designer needs to know all the things they need to know to be able to design. Now, I'm not a designer, so I'm just going to list a few because I don't know what they all are, but things like brand guidelines. Is there some brand guidelines that already exist for the company, the clients? Give those to the designer, colours, logos, typography, things like that. Or are they designing those as well? We need to know that. Is there any print material being designed as part of this as well to come alongside this? And again, that could be another phase, talking about it before. And things like examples of sites that clients like and clients don't like and things like that, so that you can get an idea of what sort of style to go for when they're designing it. So yeah, design is often a big part. Not massively important for us because we don't tend to do a massive amount of design. We do design, but not a great deal. So that's the design part. Now this is the biggie. This is the real meaty part of the specification, is how the thing works. Okay, from a user's point of view on the front end, when a user is visiting the website. So if it's a contact form, like what do I do as a user? Is it a paginated form? Is it just a single form? Is it got some conditional fields on that? If I check this happens, and if I check that, this happens. And also in terms of editing the content and adding the content, how do I create a page? How do I create a person? How do I assign them to a group? How do I do all these things? Because again, everyone's assumptions are different. Whether they've used WordPress or not, they can be very different. So you can go into an awful lot of detail here about the site and how it works. So I've written detail, detail, detail. The more you can put in here, the better. And it can get quite lengthy, obviously. So things like, if you take about the contact form as well, what about things like notification emails? People tend to forget about those. So when someone fills it in, what's going to happen? Does it send an email? Is it going to store it in the back end? Is it going to ping a Slack channel? Is it going to add a Trello card on a Trello board? What's actually going to happen? Because it's all very well filling this thing in. What happens to that data? What happens to that information? Is it stored on the website? Should it not be stored on the website? Is it emailed and then deleted on the website? Because these questions are all going to come up. It's like, you get 6 months down the line, it says, I've just logged in and I've seen all these entries in the back end of my website. What are they doing there? They shouldn't be stored in there. And it's like, well, that's how it works, If you've written it down in here, everybody knows what the method is. These are some common functionality that we mention in specifications. Search is a big one. WordPress search is, well, it's a bit rubbish really, isn't it, to be honest. So there's plugins to help with search, but WordPress search is by default is a bit rubbish. It doesn't really give you a brilliant search. And if you don't tell the client that, if we're not doing anything with search, all we're doing is letting WordPress do its thing, you need to tell the client how that search is going to work. So it's basically going to search the post title, the content, and the excerpt. If it's not in there, then it ain't going to come up in the search results. And you'll get, I've had emails and clients, I'm sure you'll emailed you, I've typed such thing in the search and nothing's appeared. Or I've typed the author's name in this search box and the author's posts aren't appearing. Well, they won't unless they're in the post title, the content, or the excerpt. So outline how search works. And then at least the client can come back and say, that's rubbish, that's not good for me. And then you can have the conversation about what search you can develop for them and improve for them. There's some really good plugins for search and some other solutions you can look at, but search is one of them that can be a bone of contention. People think search is easy because of Google, and obviously it's not taking Google long to get a really good search. Search is really hard in terms of making it really intuitive for users and getting good answers. SSL, so is the site going to, it should be, but is it going to run over SSL? Is that any implications for things like, if it wasn't on SSL before, and it is now, we've got a change of URL. Does that have any implications for redirects for Google? Who's doing those redirects? Does anyone understand what the redirects are? Is that the right thing to do? Etc. So those are an implication. E-commerce, so I've put the little emoji there because it's huge, is e-commerce. I don't think we've ever built a fully e-commerce site. We've done a few bits and bobs, but nothing major. But I've done someone else freelancing a long time ago, and the complexity of e-commerce is huge. Shipping. How do you the client? You ask the client about what are your shipping costs, and most of them can't even tell you. So how am I supposed to build that into a system? So there's so much stuff to think about with e-commerce. Have products got variations? Do they have different colours? Can I buy more than one at a time? There's all sorts like that. And I think if the clients use e-commerce before, they'll have a better idea of what they're going to get. But if they haven't used it before, you need to set some expectations about what the solution that you're going to use does, because they might have a completely different idea of what they think e-commerce is. It's a huge one, and that could potentially be a big part of this functionality if you're doing an e-commerce site. Users and roles and capabilities, do they expect everyone just to have the same role? Do they want different roles? So when person X logs in, they don't see the same as person Y. Why is my why is my recruitment manager logging in and seeing all the posts and pages when they don't? They just want to see the jobs. That sort of thing. We need to be clear on that if that's a part of the project. Performance and speed. Particularly, just thinking off the top of my head, things like sites that have got a lot of images. If you're doing like a photographer's website, think about performance and speed. Are they aware that it might be slow if they upload large images? A lot want large images. Is there something we can do for that? Are they aware of that? And maybe outline the things you're going to do to try and improve that. Multilingual, that's another huge topic, is multilingual. What's going to be translatable? Is everything going to be translatable? How am I going to translate it? Big topic. And any sort of API integrations. So, for example, when someone fills in the contact form, does it go into like their CRM, or does it, like I said, connect to different systems and so on? It's important that if that's part of the project, how does that actually work? Does it work seamlessly? How do they do it, etc. And who's responsible for changing it as well? Then there's accessibility, which up until recently I didn't realise what A11Y meant actually. I don't know if you know, but 11, it's basically A and then there's 11 letters and then the Y, which I didn't realise, but there you go. So that's if you see A11Y, that's what it means, accessibility. So I suppose high-rise digital would be H13, unlucky for some. But there you go. So accessibility, it's important. How are you going to deliver accessibility in this website? Is there a client aware that they need to make an accessible website? Do they care? Do you care? There's all those sorts of things. There are web accessibility guidelines. They're called the WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that you can have a look out there. There's various levels of accessibility guidelines. If you want to go for the top spec level, it does have an implication in terms of time to build this thing. So you need to be reading that first. It's not impossible, but harder to retrospectively do that. It's better to start at this, before you've got anything done, and say we want to be achieving these. I don't know why I'm doing that. They should be up there, shouldn't the top ones? Do them to start with. So, are there any specifics? Are there any specific users that they know of that are going to visit their site that will have accessibility requirements? Therefore, is there a specific part of their site that needs to be up to standard? Specifically, that's something to think about. Web accessibility, it's a massive topic. If you've not read anything about it and you want to, then I highly recommend looking at some of Graham Armfield's talks. You'll find them on WordPress.tv. He's done a lot at the WordCamps. Some really good stuff out there on that, so have a watch of that. But yeah, web accessibility, is important. You don't want your client to turn around at the end and say, I've just had this client contact me and they say my contact form's not accessible. You want to meet that at the start and have that conversation right at the start, and then everyone's aware of what the requirements are and what you're going to do about it. And even Tim Berners-Lee says it as well. The power of the web is in its universally. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. So it's important stuff. We need to get it right. Browser and device support, or device support. So you're going to build a website. What's it going to work on? What's it not going to work on? I suspect if everyone looked at the laptops in here, we've all got a multitude of different devices with different browsers on and different operating systems and tablets and phones that are all completely different. So what are you going to build this to support? If you say you're going to build it for everything, I think you're lying. But maybe you are, but then you need to say so in this specification. If a client wants it to work on any browser or any device, that's not easy to do. Specifically, it's not easy to do it so it looks exactly the same on all those devices. You can do some progressive enhancement and make it look perfect on newer devices and then degrade so it's usable on older devices. And again, that conversation needs to happen so that when the client logs in it on Internet Explorer 10 and it doesn't quite look right, but the content's there, they're not going to have a big shock on the face and they're not going to be, oh my God, it doesn't look right. They're going to be aware of that straight away. So thinking about browsers, device support. Browsers, it tends to be particularly Internet Explorer. It's better, the newer versions obviously. IE11 is pretty good and Edge is pretty good, but anything below IE11 does take some time to start thinking about how to make things work on all those devices. So if a client has a need, we do some work with the financial services area and they do tend to use older browsers. Don't know why, but they do. You need to think about that. You know, what's your usage going to be? If you've got 50% of your users on IE9, you need to build it for IE9. There's no point in not doing. So we need to know that information. So analytics can tell us what people are using to view this website on, if it's an existing website. If it isn't, then you're going to have to make some assumptions or you're going to have to do some testing to find out that is there information you can gain out there from other websites that you could beg, borrow or steal from to see what they're using. The current state of play, not brilliant to see, but that's kind of, I don't know when this was actually, it's probably a few months ago. This is sort of the data for like globally now. So most people use Chrome. Internet Explorer is 7.1%, moving down a bit. So it's quite a lot of people use Internet Explorer. And the devices and platforms are down on the right-hand side. I can't see on my screen either. So Windows 10's first, Android 8, Windows 7, Android 7, etc. So iOS 12, which is like your iPhones and stuff, it's quite far down the list actually, which is interesting. But again, Chrome's quite high and so on. So, you know, if they've got analytics data from the previous website, it's really important to look at it. And then also raises the question that if they don't, who's putting analytics on the site? Are they putting analytics on the site? Who knows about analytics and so on, and who's going to look after that sort of thing? But I mean, I'd highly recommend doing it. The more information you can gain about the website itself, and the more, you know, the better it's going to be in terms of your reactions to what's happening on the website. But yeah, if the data shows, you know, IE is very big, then there's an implication there in the specification. We need to address that, and we need to say so in the specification that we're going to need to do X and Y and Z. Usually front-end tasks rather than back-end tasks. But they need to be addressed. Hosting. Where? Who? How? Who's going to look after this? Where is it hosted? Is it hosted somewhere at the moment? Does the current host meet the requirements of the new site? If it's not WordPress and it is WordPress, does it have those requirements? Are you recommending hosting? Are they recommending hosting? Have they got someone else who already looks after their hosting that you need to work with? Then this needs to be addressed in this part of the specification. It doesn't need to be a long section, but it needs to be looked at. The number of times, you know, that you get to the end of the project, it's like, right, let's put this live, and the client's, well, how, where's it going? It's not a massive issue, obviously. Hosting's not particularly expensive or anything, but it needs addressing. It needs to be obvious where it's going to happen, and that doesn't delay the project. So hosting is, you know, where we're putting this website when it goes live, and when it's not live, you know, when it's being built, when it's being developed, you know, where's it going to live? The staging area is going to be, so we can log in and see it. Is that going to be on the client server? Is it going to be on our server? Is it going to be on someone else's server that you already use? Where is it going to go? We're nearly there. Ongoing support and maintenance. So, I think it's always important to address this in the spec. A lot of people don't realise that, you know, a website is like a car. It needs looking after. It needs keeping up to date. It needs software updating. It needs plugins updating, themes updating. So, you know, the specification is a good point of call to lay that out and say this is what needs to happen in terms of ongoing support and maintenance. And who is going to be doing that? Is it something that you're going to offer as a monthly cost? Is it something that the client's going to look after? Just so that, you know, everyone's aware that that's happened. If the client doesn't want to do that from you, are they going to buy from a service from someone else? Or are they going to look after it themselves? Because you don't want it further down the line in 6 months' time when, you know, there's a hack been happened, and then it's why it didn't happen. Well, they didn't update this plugin or WordPress, and then you didn't address it in here. You didn't say so. You didn't tell them. and then there's a bit of a conflict there. So it's always good to outline ongoing maintenance and support. If you've got some plans that you can offer, then put them in the spec. They don't need to be in there as a, an actual item that's in, but there's certainly something there that can be discussed. And then the last, or near the last one, is assumptions. So I mentioned this at the start. Assumptions are the things that everyone assumes that everybody knows, but they don't. So even if it sounds something that is obvious, then it's probably worth writing it down because it might not be obvious to someone else. I find this bit really hard to do because, like, how many of these do you write down? Because there could be so many assumptions that we make about certain things. But I think it's worth having in. One of the big ones here, as I mentioned at the start, is the content edition. Who is adding the content? So the client might already have it in like Word documents or on a Google Docs or something, but who is actually going to put that into WordPress or into whatever you're using? Often it gets lost. I thought you were doing it, you thought I was doing it, and it's a conflict that you don't need. It needs to be addressed as an assumption that we're not. We usually don't do the content edition. If the client wants us to, well, then we'll quote for that as well. But usually content edition is to the client. And the reason why we recommend that is because the client needs to learn how to use the website. And if they're adding the content, then they're going to learn how to do it. So we're going to obviously help them with that. We're going to show them how to use the website. But doing that themselves is, I think, a better process than just you doing it for them and then delivering this thing that they don't know anything about. It allows them to learn on the go, basically. Again, design and layout customization options, like pre-Gutenberg, are they aware of what the WYSIWYG editor could do? What there's assumptions about that, isn't there? Well, I thought you could do anything in there. You could put a slider in there. Well, you can't. You can put an image in there and you can float it left and right, but you can't do this. That sort of thing is important. Who's migrating the site to the live server? This is perhaps more important if you've got the hosting that's kind of somewhere else. It's on a system if you're dealing with a larger organisation and they've got an IT department. Who's responsible for doing and putting that on there? Are we just delivering a zip file in a database, or are they expecting us to sort of hook into all their systems and do this, that sort of thing? SEO. So we have a bit in our spec about SEO that basically says this is what you can do with SEO. You can change titles and metadata and social pictures and whatever you call it, like the open graph data for Facebook. So when you share something, it'll come up with the right things, that sort of thing. And we just outline those things in the spec. But like, do they think that the WordPress site is going to be number one at the end when you finished it? It's putting that in there is important because they might generally think that. You don't know. So that's assumptions. And ask them as well if they've got any assumptions, because they might, and you might not assume them. So that's important. And then last but not least is milestones and deadlines. So what is going to be delivered and when, basically. So we just have a little table that outlines what's going to be delivered, what the date of that delivery is, and the person responsible for doing that. That might be the person responsible for like telling the client that it's live, or it might be the client saying the content's been added, etc. But outlining that in a little table is really good. Who's doing it, who's responsible for doing that particular item, etc. So milestones and deadlines. So if they're writing content and you need that content to do something else, then they need to deliver that to you by a certain date. If they need to do design and the designer needs to do design, then they need to get that to you by a certain date in order to be able to meet the deadlines. And that's me. Finished. How to write a specification. So I am co-owner of High Rise Digital, as I mentioned. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'd be honoured. I'm WP Mark, general WordPress sort of ramblings. We're at High Rise Digital, so if you do want to know more about the mentorship program that we mentioned at the start, follow us on Twitter and you'll find out about that, and that's our website. So yeah, thank you very much.